To begin with, right from the beginning, I felt I got on very well with him. I mean, more than just because the first time I met him, I must have been interviewing him, I suppose. But anyway, he invited me to lunch at the Ritz, and we had a conversation rather than an interview type thing, and he was asking me, you know, what I thought about the then still quite new Stations of the Cross by Eric Gill in Westminster Cathedral and that kind of thing. And we just seemed to hit it off from the beginning. And then he evidently knew about the rise and fall of the well-made play, because when he sent me a copy of the Truffaut book, yes, when it came out in English, it was with a covering note in which he said, I thought you might be interested in the rise and fall of the all too well-made man, and then went on to say that he didn't know why, that since they had, I think he said 36 hours of him on tape, that they had to translate it from the French. He said it makes one sound rather stilted, and which is a mystery actually why they did that, but still. And so obviously he knew about me. He must have made it his business to know about me, and things went on. But when I arrived in LA, practically the first thing that happened was that I got a phone call from his office inviting me to go to lunch with him at his, because he had this whole building which was his unit at Universal Studios. So of course I went with delight, and we had an absolutely charming lunch, just talking basically. And of course I was questioning him about sort of obscure points in his early career that had always interested me. And when I was leaving, he said, I suppose you're very busy at the moment. So I said, well, surprisingly not yet, because the term is only just starting and so on. He said, well, come and have lunch with me next week and tell me how you're getting on with the thing. So fine, I did. And so we got into the pattern of having lunch almost every week. I mean, sometimes he'd be too busy, but at this time, obviously, he was between movies and not doing anything very much. And so that's how it started. And so I was seeing a lot of him, and of course, since I found him fascinating, I was asking him all sorts of questions and so on, and was amazed at the accuracy of his answers. I mean, and the fact that he could remember things that he can't have had any reason to think of for 50 years. So, and I think it was probably in the first main vacation after that, so in the summer of 73, that I was back in London and was talking with one of the publishers I'd worked for, and they wanted me to write a biography of some film star, and they suggested Kirk Douglas. Now, I've always respected Kirk Douglas and so on, but he wasn't, I thought, someone I particularly wanted to write a book about. But then I thought, well, Hitchcock is as famous and even as visually familiar as any film star these days, so and there hasn't been a biography of him, so why not? So when I got back, I asked him if I could write a biography, and he said, "Well, John, many have asked me, and I have always said no. I'm not going to say no to you, but I don't want to say yes just yet." So I thought, fair enough. And so we went on with our weekly lunches and so on. And after probably about 6 months, one day he said, "When you're writing this book, you should see if old so-and-so is still around." And I said, "Does that mean I can write it?" And he said, "Oh, yes, of course." But I knew it wasn't, "Oh, yes, of course." I mean, he'd been auditioning me in the same way that he would an actor or a technician that he wanted to work with. Because being a Victorian gentleman, and that's what he was, I mean, literally since he was born in 1899, his word was his bond, and if he trusted you, if he decided he trusted you, then he made it a point of trusting you completely. So that was what he was doing with me, fair enough. And so that's how I got his permission to go ahead. And then people always said things like, "Oh, he'll never let you get to Alma," because she'd recently had her second. She'd had a stroke anyway. She had a stroke in London during the shooting of Frenzy. And she had a second stroke. I'm not sure whether she'd had the second stroke at that point. I think she probably had. But anyway, it hadn't incapacitated her very much. But it meant that she was more or less confined to their house in Bel Air, a very modest house by Bel Air standards. And people said, "Oh, he'll never let you get to Alma." But in fact, he suggested, he said, "Why don't you come and have tea with Alma sometime? I'm sure she'd love to meet you." And so I did, and in fact, quite often went to see Alma and had tea with her, and sometimes him, often not, because everybody thought apparently that he was so secretive in certain respects that he wouldn't let, because my theory was that Alma was the only person that he was really frightened of. I mean, he always said he was the most nervous person in the world, frightened of everybody. And I think there was a certain amount of truth in that, but he was clever enough, therefore, to arrange the ideal for any truly nervous person, that the life around you was played by your rules. And so you did. I mean, if something was happening on set that he didn't like, he didn't have to say anything. The people around him would say, "No, you don't do that on a Hitchcock set." And even with actors, because Joe Stefano, I think it was, told me that when they were making Psycho, he wanted the opening scene to be between John Gavin and they're in a bedroom. They've obviously just had sex, and it's obviously a sort of secret thing. And so Gavin was supposed to be stripped to the waist, and he didn't want to do that. Being very straight-laced, of course, he subsequently became a diplomat.
Never did eat your lunch, did you?
I better get back to the office. These extended lunch hours give my boss excess acid.
Why don't you call your boss and tell him you're taking the rest of the afternoon off? Friday anyway, and hot.
Now, Hitch didn't want to argue with him, but he got Joe, who had written the script, to go and talk to him and argue with him about that, because when he's down, and I mean, Hitch said to him, "Well, I mean, you're a good-looking guy. You've no trouble stripping to the waist in Spartacus. So why? Well, it's different. It's different. It's not the same. If they're in a modern role and playing a secret lover and that kind of thing. Well, blah. So Stefano managed to persuade him by saying, you know, I know you find this embarrassing, but then that's the point of the scene. You use that in your performance because this is a straight-laced guy who doesn't want to be caught having sex with someone not his wife, and it's all a bit sort of embarrassing in the aftermath. The sex has been fine, but what you do afterwards when you have to talk a bit and so on, and persuaded him to do it. That was the kind of confrontation that Hitch always avoided. So, but anyway, he actually positively encouraged me to get to know Alma and spend time with her as well, and so on. So I think I come to the inevitable conclusion that somehow he liked me.
But he must have trusted you very much as well. How did you establish that trust? Do you
well,
the fact that you were English as well, do you think that had something to do with it?
I'm sure the fact that I was English helped. Also, you know, practically everyone outside his close circle of friends and relations, well, not so much friends, but the people who worked for him in his office, in his unit, his secretary, his personal assistant, etc. But outsiders, those, I was the only one who didn't have an axe to grind. I didn't have a brother-in-law that I wanted him to employ, or a girlfriend that I wanted him to cast in one of his pictures, and so on. So that must have helped. But no, I think actually, because of a couple of very accidental things. Well, first of all, The Rise and Fall of the Well-Made Play, he knew that I was very knowledgeable and about things that interested him, and so on. And also, I was very knowledgeable about him, because I mean, I think he once said that often people, what he couldn't stand was people who come in pretending to know all about him and then they get basic facts wrong, and so on. And so he knew he could trust me on that score. But also there were two rather strange things. The first one was that in London I had this friend, Fred Sill, who was an executive for a company then called CIC, which was basically a combination of Paramount and Universal outside the States. In the States they were completely separate, but elsewhere they were the same distributors and so on. And so he knew Hitchcock, obviously, because he'd had to escort him on various publicity tours of Europe over the previous 2 or 3 films. And so on, but also he knew I was interested in Art Nouveau, and he said, had I ever met Jennings Lang? Jennings Lang was a producer whose most famous film, I think, was Airport and its sequels, and so on. And when I got to LA, I phoned Jennings' office and made an appointment to go and see him. And he said, "Oh, and I'm showing the new Hitchcock film, that Frenzy, which no one had seen at that time. It didn't have its premiere till the next, whatever it is, February, March, at the Cannes Film Festival. So this was months ahead. And perhaps you'd like to see it, would I? So, yes, of course, we arranged I was going to go round at a certain time. And in the morning, his secretary called to confirm, and again mentioned that they've got the screening. So if you can be here by 7, that would be great.
It's a woman!
What's up round her neck?
She's been strangled.
Looks like a tie.
Yes, it's a tie, all right. Another necktie murder.
Now, apparently what Jennings had been checking on exactly who I was, other than some friend of Fred's, and discovered that I was, if I had to put it innocently and modestly, one of the leading film critics of the world. And so, of course, he shouldn't be showing me this film. So, but after I'd seen his collection, and we had a couple of drinks and settled down, and were comfortable. So then he said, well, he was going to he got a screening for Robert De Niro. So he said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll call Bob to see if he's coming, because he never keeps appointments. He probably won't come. And if he's not coming, I can show it to you. And so we called Bob. Bob was not coming. So we settled down, and so I was one of the first outsiders actually to see the film, which I loved. And I thought, after a couple of not so good films, this is a real return to form. Told him so. He was stupid enough to tell Hitchcock. Now, Hitchcock was so furious with him that he never spoke to Jennings again. But how this would affect me, of course, I had no idea, because I didn't know this at all. But I never said anything, I never wrote anything, I never told anybody that I'd seen the film, and so on. And so I was at the Cannes Festival the next year, and one of the first things I got when I arrived was an invitation to have lunch with Mr. Hitchcock. So I thought, oh my God, no. What a typical Hitchcock scene. I'm sure this wasn't accidental. He had a limousine, which he was sitting in already, and I got in, and we drove miles and miles into what was then a sort of terrain vague. No buildings at all. Now it's all high-rises along the beach side, but then it was the middle of nowhere, and in the middle there was this sort of small hotel, sort of restaurant, and that's where we were going. It looked like something out of The Postman Always Rings Twice. And Hitch was very, perfectly polite, but didn't say much on the drive. And so on, so I thought, what am I in for? And when we arrived there, the food was excellent, as you would expect. We were all alone there, and he couldn't have been nicer. He was friendly, forthcoming, talkative. So I worked out that this was one reason why he would think he could trust me, because with a big temptation, being the only film critic in the world to have seen the new Hitchcock, that I didn't do anything illegitimate about it, and so on. So he knew he could trust me. And I think that was an important part of the thing, the knowledge that I was a genuine person who was pretty knowledgeable and so on, and second, that I was trustworthy.
Yes, yeah. You obviously had a close working relationship with him, and you were often on the set of Family Plot. That was his last film.
That's right. Throughout the screening, especially if they. His personal assistant, Peggy Robertson, would let me know if they were doing anything particularly interesting, going to a particularly interesting location or so on. That's why I went to San Francisco when they were shooting the kidnapping of the bishop in San Francisco Cathedral. So, yes.
Yeah. Now, one thing you mentioned a while ago And one thing that struck me was The Birds was released in 1963, and this was before you knew Hitch. But I remember that you were saying recently, with a little dismay, how Tippi Hedren had made a number of accusations against Hitchcock regarding his conduct towards her. How well did you know her, and why did this surprise you, what she was saying?
Well, I never knew her terribly well, but I did get to know her. I first met her on the set of The Countess from Hong Kong, the Chaplin film, in which she plays Brando's wife, so it's a lesser part. The two lead roles, obviously, are Brando and Sophia Loren. And I just met her because I spent some time on the set of that as well, and she was there, so I was talking to her and so on, but hardly to count. And but then, when I was writing the biography, I I hadn't met her apart from that, and Donald Spoto, of all people, whom I knew quite well, and I'd written a sort of commendation quote for his first book about Hitchcock, in which everything is a masterpiece and everything is right with the world. It was Donald who took me to see Tippi for the first time, and we had a pleasant tea. A lot of things in LA happen at tea time, you'd be surprised. And so we had a very pleasant tea and chat, and she talked a lot about Hitch, because I was seeing her in order to pump her about her experience of Hitch. And she didn't give the slightest hint that there was anything really untoward. I knew there'd been a bust-up of some kind, and what she explained, she said, well, he invented me. I was just a fashion model in New York, and so he saw me in some television commercial, thought I had some quality, and brought me out, made all sorts of tests, put me under contract, and taught me everything I know. He couldn't have been more wonderful as a mentor. Sure, let me sit in on script sessions and so on, so I saw the whole business from top to bottom through his eyes and with his assistant and so on, and absolutely wonderful. And when he wanted me to, anything to do, some might say I was treated as a puppet and so on, but really anything to do with my being a star in his films that I was happy to do. And that included, for instance, his telling me what I should wear in public, what sort of image I should create, this, that, the other.
You were brand spanking new to movies.
Oh, yeah, but how lucky was I to have not only Hitch as my director, but he was my drama coach.
Oh, he was giving you lessons?
How lucky, you know? Yes.
And you were with this world-famous guy. Were you nervous around him?
No, not at all. No. No, in fact, I think had he not given me the assurance and the security that I would be able to do this, I don't think I could have done it, because almost everybody in Hollywood was really saying, you know, why did you give this part to an unknown? You know, not only an unknown, but she'd never done a film or any acting, you know, other than the commercials, you know. So I was under a lot of pressure, but if he hadn't given me that assurance, I never could have done it. Okay. I never could have done it.
And so on. He said, apparently he didn't get on with her then boyfriend. She was divorced from her first husband, Melanie Griffith's father. And this time she was having a relationship with William Marshall, who subsequently she married. And so he said he didn't approve of him very much, I think, but, well, so what? But it all came to a head when, this is her version, which isn't exactly accurate even so, but she said that she wanted to go, from her modelling career days, she was a patron for a number of charities, as these ladies are, and so on, and she was invited to go to a sort of $100 a plate dinner for this particular charity. Took place at the weekend, and that's where it wasn't, but that's what she said at the time. And she wanted to go to it because it wouldn't interfere with the shooting in any way, and so on. And Hitch said no, she couldn't, because it would break the concentration. This was a very difficult, very sort of fraught sort of role, and she couldn't. He wouldn't let her, and so on. And she then, well, first of all, she told me what she said, and then next time I saw Hitch, I asked him about it, and I also talked to Peggy Robertson about it, and they were all pretty well agreed. Hitch's way of putting it, though, was, he said, well, she said something that no one is permitted to say. So I said, what did she say? What did she say? He said, she referred to my weight. And apparently what she actually said was, you fat pig, who are you to tell me what I can and can't do? And this in front of the whole cast. So,
how involved in your personal life did Hitch get? Didn't he tell you where to go and how to dress?
Oh, he wanted to control everything. Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. What to eat, what to drink, who to see, who not to see.
Who to give interviews to? And
yeah,
all
absolutely.
That? And
total control.
And were you totally controllable?
No.
I know things were different then, no, they didn't have like sexual harassment suits and everything. Did he ever put any pressure on you?
Pressure for what?
That kind of pressure.
No.
No?
And apparently after that, for a week or so, it was, would you tell Mr. Hitchcock? Would you ask Mr. Hedren? And so on. And then it all calmed down. They finished the picture in good fettle. She actually baked stuff for the end of shooting party and was there, and everybody was lovey-dovey again. And that was all she said, that he had been this little bit too possessive and domineering in certain ways.
There was a reason behind that, because he wanted her to focus on the character.
That's right, and the
by
atmosphere, the whole atmosphere. And I mean, for a fledgling actress, it is a very difficult and complex part.
And so he had you in a contract, right? A 7-year contract, is that right? And he wouldn't release you from the contract to do other movies.
No, he wouldn't. I went into Hitch's office on the set to ask him for 2 days off so that I could go to New York to accept an award on The Tonight Show. And he thought that was outrageous, and he then made this demand on me that you know what, I want to get out of this contract. When we are finished with Marnie, I am finished. I am out. And he said, well, you can't. You have your little girl to support. Your parents are getting older. And I said, none of them would want me to be in a situation where I'm not happy.
What did he say to you?
He said, I'll ruin your career.
Wow.
I said, do what you have to do, and out the door I went.
And did he ruin your career?
Yes, he did.
So you could understand why he would think that. Anyway, so that was what he said at the time. Now, when Donald Spoto's second book, which was the second biography after mine, came out, it's The Dark Side of Genius. And again, I think I know why that was, because I remember talking to Peggy Robertson, his personal assistant, once, and Donald had just visited, and Hitch hadn't been able to see him, and so on. And Peggy was saying, I don't know why Hitch is like that, because Donald, he's so sweet. I mean, he's so nice. And he does love Hitchcock. He admires everything he did. He worships Hitchcock. I don't know why Hitch won't see him. Always makes an excuse after the first time. So apparently Donald only ever met Hitchcock once. And I don't know why I said this really, but I said, well, I'd be careful what you say to Donald. Left it at that. And obviously, since Donald was like the boy that Betty Davis describes in that film where she plays a librarian, she's saying, he used to love books, and he used to love me. Now his love has turned to hate. So I think that's what happened with Donald. So everything that was positive before in The Dark Side of Genius, it's turned negative. And on the centenary celebrations when Farley Granger was over here and so on, and I was asking him about that, and he said, you know, it's all, what Donald writes in that book is complete rubbish, because he says that the shooting of rope was a torture where we were forced to have dinner every night in his house in Bel Air, and he would cook dinner for us and so on, and we had to learn the whole script like it was a stage play or something, which apparently film actors aren't used to doing. It never occurred to me that they wouldn't do that, and and he said this was torture, and it just shows what a sadist the man was, and so he said, "It's rubbish. I mean, it was one of the happiest shootings I ever remember. It was wonderful. I mean, it was wonderful getting to know your fellow actors and your director so well in these intimate personal circumstances. So on, we had a lovely time. Wonderful food. He's a great cook, and so on. So this is all the spin that Donald has put on it. So that in that first book, he mentions that there's something implying that Hitch somehow put the make on Tippi during the shooting of Marmee, and she always earlier in the book he writes as though everybody had total recall, so any conversation that's reported, it's reported verbatim, and but on this solitary occasion, he doesn't say what was said, and you think, well, it does make a difference. I mean, did he say, you know, you have become very dear to me, and she thought, oh my God, you know, he's, or did he say, suck my cock now? And and you don't know, you're not told, and so on. So that was the beginning of it.
What was it? Sexual? Was he after you physically?
Yes, but that didn't happen until we were almost finished with Marnie, and you know, it really was so upsetting to me that he would pull that card. That I
was the Birds before that.
Mm-hmm.
He never did it during the Birds.
Never. No.
Just was he okay up to then?
Yes.
Easy to work with?
Oh, yes. And he and Alma were my drama coaches, and you know, it was a perfect situation, just perfect.
So what did you make of it when it happened near the end of Marnie?
It was the end of Marnie, and it was just very disappointing and disturbing, and a situation that I couldn't live with. So I said I wanted to get out of the contract, and he said, well, you can't. You have your daughter to take care of, and your parents are getting older. And I said, well, you know what, they would be more concerned about my level of integrity than that. And
you know, it's funny that today you see a lot of sexual predators, right?
Yes, unfortunately.
Did he actually touch you?
No.
No. But he made it clear what he wanted.
Yes.
And then gradually it's got more and more through the years. And you ask yourself, well, what else has she to keep her in the eyes of the public. Another thing that she said early on, but not to me, was that he tried to ruin her career, that she was under contract and she was offered great parts in other films while she was under contract, but he wouldn't let her make any of them. And of course wouldn't use her himself. What he wanted to do after Marnie was his version of Mary Rose, the Barry play, as a horror film with Tippi in the lead. And it was Universal who said, no, look, you've tried to make her a star twice and it hasn't worked, so we're not going to finance a third attempt. And indeed, he told me that his contract specified that he could make anything, provided it didn't cost more than $3 million, and except Mary Rose. He wasn't allowed, specifically not allowed to make Mary Rose. So that part of it wasn't true. But also, if you look in the IMDb, you find that every year after Marnie, she did something, a television thing or so. So it's not true that she was barred from doing anything else and blackballed by Hollywood and so on. But so that was the next thing that snuck in. And so by the time when her autobiography was about to come out, just after The Girl, the television film, which suggests that he put the makeup and tried to rape her in the limousine and so on. And so on, that she was interviewed at the Times and called him a pervert and an evil man. I'm thinking, how dare she? I mean, that's going too far. She likes to suggest that also, early on in all this, after Donald's book had come out, I did ask Peggy, well, what do you think? Because Peggy always stayed a close friend of Tippi's, and so on. And she said, well, I think Tippi overinterprets sometimes. So I'm sure that if there was anything, it was of the, you become very dear to me, but I think, is he about to bear down on me? So that's the basic story. But I mean, it's got to the point now that I was upset, is the word, I think, recently to see a headline in a paper: Hollywood abuse from Hitchcock to Weinstein. So I'm not saying that Hitch was perfect, ideal, that he didn't have, I'm sure he did have all kinds of motives hidden, many of them, I think, even from himself. But that way he did not behave. And in fact, I'm sure this is true. I mean, people wondered about his previous cool blondes with a sizzle underneath. How was he with them? And so, well, the answer is his first personal assistant, Joan Harrison, who he brought over from England with him, who was very attractive, cool blonde. Peggy told me that when he brought her out, by this time Joan had long moved on to become the first important Hollywood female producer, and also went back to Hitchcock to work as producer on, I think, the first and second series of Alfred Hitchcock Presents on television. And so anyway, and I knew her. I met her, I interviewed her for the film. But anyway, Peggy told me that when she arrived in Los Angeles, everyone was saying, so you're going to be running to Hitchcock's bed to replace Joan, and so on. So being the sort of jolly hockey stick sort of robust English lady that she was, Peggy went to Hitchcock and says, everyone says I'm going to be expected to be your mistress like Joan Harrison. And Hitch looked horrified and said, "Ooh, I can tell you definitively that I was never between the sheets with Joan." And Peggy said, "Well, that's not saying much. I mean, not between the sheets maybe, but on the kitchen table, on the hearthrug, in the haystack," and so on. And Hitch, with a look of absolute horror, which I'm sure was humorously assumed, said, "Do people really do that sort of thing?" So when he said he'd been celibate for the last 30 years or so, that he was speaking truth. So that's the Tippi story.